So the mode shift scenario here is all about improving mobility and accessibility choices. So moving along from those two scenarios we've just heard, facilitating a noticeable shift to public transport, reducing travel demand by private motor vehicles, and making it easier for society to choose healthy transport options. So health is another big issue that we face in Tasmania. And there's a few others too that I'll mention as I go through that justify us having a bigger vision around the transport questions. So we need to be promoting walking and cycling for our short trips, or just getting people more active in day-to-day activities through moving around, through getting from A to B. It's also about things we can start delivering now. So this scenario, it's not necessarily novel. It's about improving and building on what we have already, but thinking a little bit more differently, in fact quite a lot differently in terms of prioritisations. Some of the things we're doing, so we've seen some changes and improvements in the Hobart city in terms of creating more pedestrian-friendly zones, etc., and some cycling improvements and some improvements to connectivity there. And we've also seen some shifts and changes in bus delivery services. So we've got higher frequency routes serving key activity centres like the university and bringing people from the outer suburbs in one direct swoop rather than having to change buses. And those sorts of things are really important. But at the heart of this scenario is the acknowledgement that building more road and parking spaces alone is not going to solve traffic issues into the future. Ultimately, the first and the second scenarios outlined today, they still perpetuate a low-density urban form that greatly limits our opportunity to actually deliver a much higher level of public transport service and walkable places in which we can live and access facilities and services more readily without using our vehicles. So the scenario is about rethinking this. It's more joined up thinking, integrated land use and transport planning, and better use of financial and technological tools, and perhaps turning on its head the way we think about transport. The features of this scenario, which I'm supposed to have moved along to, the features of this scenario are threefold. You've got, I think, a longer list in your brochure, but ultimately it's the three. Prioritise investment in a superior public transport system, not one that at the moment we're moving from being a public transport system that's largely catering for minimum service, trying to ensure that people have access to transport of some sort if they don't have anything. But it's not necessarily in all places catering for needs, and it's not shifting people away from the motor vehicle and making some trips and some corridors more attractive to be using another mode other than the vehicle. So it's prioritising and thinking about a more superior public transport system. But importantly, developing a regional settlement strategy and mechanisms to deliver a more compact and connected city that supports a superior public transport system. At the moment, we haven't got that. We haven't got a vision, an understanding of where we're going. I think that's what Stephen was quite clear about, and that we need to be thinking about that. At the moment, our low-density city, our low-density lifestyle isn't catering for the things we might want in terms of improving our public transport and having local communities and precincts, neighbourhoods that are more amenable to walking and cycling, and for those short trips that we would like to make, perhaps not in our vehicle. And that's the third point. It's creating the safe, well-connected and appealing places to facilitate walking and cycling for short trips. So you've got your regional scale and your local scale, and we have to be thinking of both. So back to the first. Prioritisation of investment in the public transport, development of a superior public transport system. It's about heightening the appeal of public transport to facilitate a shift to its greater use, aiming to perhaps double the current share of public transport for the journey to work over the next decade. In some corridors, we might be able to do better. And then you ramp it up as your land use changes and you start to change the form of your city, because that obviously does take quite some time. So this means addressing public transport reliability, convenience and service frequency. And these are well known, you know, if you do surveys around the world about what people would like in public transport if they were going to use it and what makes people not use it, it comes back down to frequency, reliability, and having the knowledge that the bus is going to come or the train is going to come and you're not going to be left standing. So they're the things that we need to firstly focus on, and there's some easy things that we can do in that regard. On the left, we've got a picture of, you know, real-time smart information. If we go to other cities, we can readily look on our smartphones or look on a digital information board and see whether we've missed a bus and how many minutes the next one's going to arrive. The same applies to other modes of light rail or trains. So that's a simple thing that can be done now, and we know that people are quite keen on that and would be very receptive to that, and that alone may actually heighten the awareness and understanding of what services are out there and get people to think about shifting now, never mind when we introduce more better services. The other point is about focusing on prioritisations of buses on roads as key congested pinch points. So these are things that we can do now. Retrofitting our roads to support a shift, so giving priority to buses. Conversion of parking to improve flow, traffic light priority, using technology effectively to help us do that and manage traffic better. So we haven't got the bus stuck in the traffic. We saw pictures of that with the opening video. We could see the buses, but they were also sitting in the traffic. They need to be bypassing the traffic. We need to see them zooming past us as we're stuck. Upgrading bus stops, creating safe, appealing and informative bus stations. That's the real-time information there as well. And there's a couple of examples of that. And the high frequency, improving on and building on high frequency bus corridors, but ensuring that we can get people to those corridors. It's quite challenging to be able to roll out a public transport system that serves everybody. So we need to make sure, how can we, if we're shifting from the motor vehicle, we need to make it attractive. So it's got to be frequent, it's got to be fast in the peak periods, but how do we get people from outlying areas to those services? So that's something else that needs to be thought through in terms of how we plan the bigger construct of our transport system. Fare structures and reward schemes are things to consider. The types of vehicles we have, buses, light rail, trackless trams. I'm not specifying one or another. There are a number of submissions made. They all have merit, and potentially their place, depending on the corridor and depending on the structure and form of the city that we want to design in terms of our regional strategy. So back to the second feature, which was the regional settlements. Here we're identifying where we can deliver more compact urban form, mixed-use development, well integrated with public transport services to increase viability of public transport. Looking at shaping and configuring our city. Where are the sub-centres going to be? What are the ideal places? Where we're going to have our jobs? What's the job situation at the moment? What are the jobs of the future? Therefore, what is our city going to look like, and how can we facilitate that and be more constructive in terms of its sustainability and the way that we help form our future city in terms of the Greater Hobart region? So that's jobs and services and other activities. We need to be thinking of all those things. They're what that creates the demand for travel and for how we can then respond to how people what mode they can take for that travel purposes. We also need to deliver more housing choice, And that's another big issue. We've got the health, we've got the transport, we've got the housing. It's another current issue. So we've got, at the moment, pretty well, mostly one housing choice, which is single dwellings on reasonable lot sizes, and we keep rolling that out. So we need to think about the choice that we give people for housing into the future as we think about the demand for housing and the supply of it. And that's where we can really think about our urban form as well, getting housing, medium density, not necessarily high density, but medium density, townhouses, maybe 4 to 7 stories, in key corridors and transports, well integrated with and designed around neighbourhoods that facilitate walking and access to your public transport. All these things have been discussed before. We've had forum after forum where a lot of these issues have been raised. So this isn't necessarily novel. It is just something that we know we need to do. So the third thing is the creation of places that are safe, well-connected and appealing for walking or cycling. It's about creating local communities where we don't have to drive to get the milk, or go to the gym, or drop our child at childcare. We can do that without necessarily having to take our car. And if we design our local places for 8-year-olds or 80-year-olds, we're going to be doing well. We've been talking about this for years. We know what to do. It's not just doing it in the city centre, it's also in our suburbs, it's also in our sub-centres. Kingston, Glenorchy, Moona, Sorrel. We need to be thinking about these places and facilitating attention to that detail at the local level. So in terms of just thinking about the benefits and the opportunities, this scenario provides transport choice. That's really what we're about here. Ramping it up, there might be even more that we can do, but this is really thinking about the reality that we can actually do this. There are things that are happening now that we can ramp up even further if we so decide that we're going to prioritise this. It's improving accessibility, potentially social cohesion if we're doing it well, improving accessibility and amenity in communities. And it's addressing healthier and safer communities and housing choice for a great array of household types and mixed incomes. So a more attractive, smaller city with less impeded by traffic, and there's an evidence base for the economic value of that as well. And ultimately it would be a city with a lower carbon footprint. The trade-offs, they're ultimately trade-offs with everything, so funding and decision-making trade-offs, leadership's required across scales, local government, state government, and therefore also bringing in the federal government. It also means engaging with others, major trip generators, employers, perhaps. But assessing the real costs, I think that's what Adrian was alluding to, assessing the real costs, the bigger picture of and the benefits should help that argument in investing and making decisions to invest in this further. Traffic congestion is not necessarily going to be solved completely. You're talking about a shift, not necessarily a complete jump to everyone using public transport, but you'll be able to bypass traffic. You'll have a choice. It may be difficult to provide public transport to absolutely everywhere, but if it's planned well, you can get people accessing through various means in a well-designed system to some really good transport corridors. And that could be light rail, that could be bus transitways, or trackless trams. Urban form can't change overnight, but we need to start doing it now because otherwise it's going to run away with us. So that would be my last point